Hello and welcome to the today's Manufacturing Management live panel discussion on International Women's Day. My name is Chris Beck. I'm the editor of Manufacturing Management magazine. Now, according to Make UK statistics from 2018, the UK's manufacturing sector has faced a significant gender imbalance. About 3/4 of the workforce were male, and just a quarter of those were male. And those stats haven't really changed in the 2 or 3 years since. And in senior roles, the problem is even more pronounced. Just 20% of women in the industry are in the highest pay band within the sector. And of course, this isn't just a problem that's affecting us today, but it's going to affect us in the future. The skills shortage in manufacturing is obviously well known. And it's clear that the next generation of female engineers is potentially being put off from pursuing a career in the sector. At school, just 35% of girls choose maths, physics, computing, or a technical vocational qualification at age 16, compared to 94% of boys. Just 7% of engineering apprentices are female, and only 15% of engineering graduates are female. So what steps can the industry as a whole take to narrow this gap and make manufacturing more appealing to girls coming through school today and the women working in the sector at the moment? I'm delighted to be joined by a trio of leading women from the sector to help me discuss that. First up, we have Dr. Sara Ridley. Sara is a project director at Grantham-based powertrain manufacturer Autocraft Solutions Group. She's an enthusiastic STEM ambassador, supports local schools with engineering clubs, but also encouraging girls into engineering. Next, we have Jenny Holloway, the CEO of Fashion Enter, a not-for-profit organisation that provides training and facilities for the development of skills within the fashion and textiles industries. Jenny's recently taken on 77 workers from Laura Ashley when that business went under, and has found them roles in Fashion Enter's new factory in Wales. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Helen Rogers from the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, or NMITE, in Hereford. NMITE is a brand new higher education facility that specialises in providing engineering skills and training in a new and innovative way, which we'll hear about very shortly. Thank you to you all for joining me today. And I'd like to start with an open question for all of you, really. What are women in manufacturing and engineering experiencing today, and what are some of the key challenges they still face? Sara, how about we start with you?
Hello. I think from my point of view, and I still see it today, that the lack of flexibility is one of the biggest single factors that put women off, particularly women already in the industry. And I think that actually the sort of local lockdowns we've had, the homeschooling needs, have really brought that to the fore, certainly for the women I work with. I'm fortunate not to have school-aged children, but I have to say that had I had to try and hold my job down and educate at home, that would have been very difficult. But even without all those challenges, actually, many of us have caring responsibilities, and it is very difficult in a job that is seen to be either very firmly shift-based or firmly in a working day-based. Whereas in actual fact with manufacturing, as we know, because it is an end-to-end process that is continuous, any point within that day where you interact does make a difference. And I think flexibility is a big challenge for us.
Thanks. Jenny, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I totally agree with Sarah's comments there. I also think in our industry in particular, we're garment makers. I think we are actually really suffering from an image issue. The idea of sweatshops, I mean, there's been so much bad press about what has been happening in the factories in Leicester that people don't realise just how skilled garment makers are. And I can go back to the days when I was a selector at Marks and Spencer's, and I used to go to factories of SR Gens, and it was a time when women used to be sort of almost in their pearls and twin sets, and their daughters would go in. And there was succession planning for the future, and it was really regarded as a craft, and we seem to have lost that. So I think our sector struggles from an identity problem. And I also think it's about, Sarah's touched on this with regards to going into schools and doing STEM and making sure that even at primary school, we really invigorate how fantastic engineering is for women today.
Yeah, and Helen, finally to you.
Yeah, a couple of points, if I may. The first is that there are there are issues clearly within the number of women in manufacturing and in engineering in general. I think, however, we need to think as well that there are opportunities, because actually what we as women bring to the engineering table, it can be very different and offer a very different lens and perspective. And I think that's a real quality and value we need to emphasize more. I completely agree with both Sara and Jenny regarding emphasizing more within school environments what engineering is about. And I think a key one there is, if we were to think about careers where you help someone, and often that's the most appealing to young women, actually, the ability to help someone. The first thing everyone thinks of is medicine. And so actually what you're finding now in medicine is that the statistics have completely changed from sort of 30 years, 40 years ago, where it was male dominated, into now a female dominated occupation as a result of that. And I think people don't think about engineering enough as actually what we do is help people. We help people solve challenges. We help them find solutions. And I think if we made that within schools from a younger age, and I think if teachers were aware of that as well, actually, I think that would make a massive difference to how engineering is perceived. It's not perceived as a help, it's perceived in a very different way, and I think we need to move that thinking within a school environment.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, and something I just quickly want to pick up. Something that Sara said around, the events of the last year or so have really changed the way everyone works. But what impact has the pandemic had on the way that women in particular work? Obviously, they're more likely to be in charge of childcare, homeschooling, but they also are going to have to juggle work, whether that's working from home or working on site in a factory. How do you think the last year or so has kind of demonstrated the kind of differences in the way in the opportunities for men and women at work? Sara, I don't know if you want to pick up on the point that you made.
I think for a lot of women, what it's done is actually increase the burden and made it much more stressful. And I think what we've seen is an awful lot of extended working hours. So I know that my working week has grown considerably over the last year. So the hours in which I work, not just actually in the workplace, but also at home. And I think that's very reflective of a lot of women's experience. And I don't like the broad brush statement, but I don't think it's been quite as a big an impact on men, certainly not the men that I've worked with and the people that I've seen. Actually, what's happened is circumstances have made it much harder to do your job, but your job has either increased because of the extra demands on your time from external sources, such as the caring responsibilities, or even just that because you haven't got the same level of support at work because of the pandemic, then actually what's happened is your working day and your working week has expanded quite significantly. And I certainly think from my point of view, there's far more evening work and weekend work than I've done for quite a few years. I don't think that's recognised. I think what actually we're in danger of is overloading people to the point where they feel they can't carry on in the sector. And I think that would be a crying shame. We need to look at how we can incorporate all of that into the working day and actually not make it a burden, but an opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. Jenny, is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, 70% of our workforce are women. So I can honestly say that the pandemic has been pretty damn horrendous. I mean, it's horrendous for the NHS and the economy, of course, but it has been incredibly challenging. But actually, that's where I would agree with Helen. I do think women have got this ability to juggle. I think they bring something new to engineering. And I think that we can have a very good team effort and understanding. Certainly, we have done everything and more that we can do with flexible working rights. We have lots of people on part-time anyway. And I think we almost sometimes have to have a bit of a laissez-faire opinion and attitude, because there's only so much you can do. We have been on survival mode for at least a year, you know, from start to end. We've grasped new opportunities. So we were very fortunate to get a contract on PPE. And I think that's where women are really good at identifying an issue and coming up with a solution and then making it work. And I do think women talk. I feel like I'm talking too much now, but I actually feel as though, you know, we can have a cup of tea and a cake or a biscuit and say, come on, how are we going to do this? And I don't think there's that ego and attitude that therefore exists. And it is just getting through a situation sometimes and making the most of it.
Yeah, I think creative solutions, I think you're absolutely right, Jenny. I mean, we look at things with from a totally different perspective often, and we think outside the box quite a lot, I think, as women. I think because we're used to, as you rightly say, juggling so many things, I think we're used to thinking, how can we do these, 12 different things in the time of 4 or whatever? And you're absolutely right. And I concur with you, Sarah, on just how difficult it's been in terms of lengthening the working day and the working week. And I think in general, I think actually, there's a lot to be said for being able to work from home in a flexible environment. But I think not just women, but we all need to really reflect on the danger of never stepping away. And I know myself, I'm notorious for just checking an email, just having a quick look at what's happening. And so actually I need to be physically distant from an office to really switch off. So having this in my home environment is about as dangerous for me as can be. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are equally feeling the same pressure, and how do you step away? And then of course you have the guilt, don't you? You have the guilt where you're looking at an email and yet you're supposed to actually have hung the washing out and packed a school lunch or whatever it is simultaneously, and you're trying to deal with all things, and suddenly somebody's not cleaning towel in over a soap type of thing, and we're trying to do all these things equally well, and we put this pressure on ourselves to achieve, that I think we can be a little hard on ourselves as women, I think, at times. And critical, but that's also, again, it's our strength, because we're often incredibly passionate about what we do and we want to excel at doing it, and that's the way we are, but we need to be, I think, kinder on ourselves maybe sometimes.
Helen, could I ask, do you have a dog?
No, I don't.
I think you need a dog to go for a walk, and then that way you won't even think about work.
Very good suggestion.
My son would be delighted to hear that.
But it is another job, Helen, because you will have to walk the dog. It is another.
I know. Well, let's add it to the list.
Yes.
I do think, though, Helen,
rather than 12.
I think, though, Helen, as well, one of the things you said there, it is also a strength, and I think you're right. But I think what we need to do actually for young women coming through is empower them with that knowledge that they don't have to be perfect at everything. They have a perfect right to be there. And actually what they offer is hugely positive. And one of the positives for me is that just as we started the pandemic, we took on our graduate engineers. We decided to take them anyway. And I'm really glad we did. And one of them is a very bright and very thrilling young woman who has given me personally a huge amount of positivity about the way that she has tackled this, the way that she wants to excel at things. And it's been really good for me to be able to work with her and actually say to her, do you know what? You're doing a brilliant job. Don't worry. You can step away from this. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes because we're very much a minority, certainly in the industry that I work in, very much a minority, and you're quite heads down getting the job done, actually to be able to say to somebody, do you know what? You're doing a really good job. Don't worry. Don't put this pressure on yourself because it's unnecessary. What you're offering is tremendous. And actually having that female to female contact on a professional level has been an absolute joy. Absolutely.
Absolutely, Sarah. There's something and Jenny, actually, you've both forged very successful careers within manufacturing. How have you seen, Jenny? You touched on it earlier, the kind of changing role of women in the fashion industry, and how it used to be, mums, daughters, granddaughters, so on. How have you seen the industry change in terms of its attitudes, but also the opportunities that are available to women within manufacturing and within in the industry in general?
Well, actually, I think if I look back, I was a sponsored student by Rolls-Royce, and it was the days of the V8 diesel Perkins, and then Perkins took over Rolls-Royce V8 diesel engines. And I remember going in, and actually I'm much happier in that environment than when I was a buyer. And you'd think that traveling around the world and buying clothes would be fantastic, but actually it wasn't really for me, even though I really enjoyed my career. But I was very aware that when I was at Rolls-Royce, I was a minority. I think I may have been only one of two girls at that time that were on their undergraduate programme. But I think you almost have to rise to the challenge, and it is about your personality as well. I think you have to be quite resilient, and it was years ago, there were sexist comments that were made. And whilst I didn't appreciate them, I just thought, what, you have to develop an armour. To me, the biggest tragedy at the moment is this sort of awful image that garment manufacturing has. And we hemorrhaged money for years in our factory because we wanted to do it properly. I could have made a quick buck very quickly, but that's why we were set up as a not-for-profit, because it was about doing things properly. So I think what we're seeing now are undergraduates that are in technology fields, and they are a little bit like Sara said. They are positive. They're aware of what they're letting themselves in for, and they're bringing something new. They wouldn't stand up today with sexist comments. They would pull them into line, and they have a stronger voice, and that's to be applauded. That's what we want to see. And I think as time goes on, there'll be more and more opportunities for women in senior positions in engineering, because, as Helen rightly said, we bring a lot to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Sara, how does your personal experience mirror what Jenny said there?
Quite closely, really. I think the tragedy, I left school at 16 and became an apprentice. My parents didn't believe in higher education for girls, which even then was a little unusual, but nonetheless, quite a long while ago. I think the tragedy for me is I went back as an adult to do a degree. So I was in my 30s with 4 children when I went back to university. And I was still the only female in the class. So, and to me, that's the huge tragedy. And I do think that actually Jenny's quite right. A lot of it is about image. And one of the things I'm very passionate about with schools is actually, before they even get to think about their choices, to actually help them to understand, one, just how big a field engineering and technology is, because it's enormous. And there are so many things you can do, and it's so exciting. But also to say that it's not, maths and science aren't hard. They're just different. Lots of people find English hard. It's no different to that. And also, they're not the province of men and boys. Girls are equally good at them, and actually they have some really exciting things that they can do. And so I think it's about showing them what the opportunities are. And I think that's the thing. I went into engineering because I couldn't stay on at school, and it was the most sciencey thing I could find to do. I was quite lucky. I took my O-levels in 1984, and that was when the WISE campaign really kicked off. And so it showed me what could be done. And that's why I went in to be an engineer. It was almost an accident, to be perfectly honest. But I absolutely couldn't have chosen a better career. I've had so much variety. But there have been a lot of sexist comments. I think the tragedy for me is the only person who's ever said to me, "Don't you feel guilty taking a man's job? It's another woman." I think as women, we need to be kinder to ourselves and much more positive. Yeah, no, it shocks me too. The only person who's ever said that to me, I've had an awful lot of, it's very weird to be managed by a woman. I've had a lot of cases where people have asked to speak to a proper engineer.
Wow.
Did you remove your thing?
Where colleagues have brought proper proper male engineers into the room, so I can be, my opinion can be verified, but you know, you rise above those, and as you say, once you get older and more resilient, you just don't put up with it anymore.
Wow.
Do you remove your finger from their eye very slowly?
It's all you can do sometimes, I think. I do think as women we need to be much more supportive of each other.
Yes.
And that's why things like this are so important, to get women networking with other women, because I do think it's a real truism. If you can see it, you can be it, and there aren't enough of us visible to be role models. I worry that I'm becoming too old to be a role model to young women, but I think we actually need them for mid-career women as well. So we need to have it all the way through the levels so people can see what is possible.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah, very good point.
You're really right there, Sara. I couldn't agree more. And you touched upon an interesting one with regard to the maths and physics. So at NMIT, we aren't requiring maths and physics on entry in order to try and open up the group. In my mind and in the mind of NMIT, we want to have a place that is reflective of society. So it has all of the different nuances that society brings with it, because we think as a collective group, and if you're trying to solve challenges associated with society, you need to have society at the table, and communication is absolutely key. So our view is that actually you don't need to be an expert in maths and physics. You need to be able to use them as tools, just as you would be able to use some software or communication or your knowledge about legal matters. All of these things are things that you would need to bring to a table. Your ethical approach, that's a huge one, but we need to be empathetic. We need to be able to listen effectively, all of these skills. And so actually we view them in exactly the same way at NMIT, and we view that we can help students learn these attributes by putting them in within a context. So often, I think in schools, maths and physics and sciences, they're often viewed very starkly, and there's not always a rationale behind why you need to do something. Don't get me wrong, I love a differential equation. I get very excited by them. I'm a little bit odd, I suppose, but the fact is that for really, you need to know why. Why do you need to know these things? And so by providing, again, a context. And then if we provide a context, then we can understand that we're there trying to full circle to the whole bringing society in and that representation. So I completely concur. I equally have had a career whereby I've been, we might be in a conference and the only woman in the room, but actually I've found that an advantage because nobody forgets me. I have a voice, but partly because of the gender. In fact, it's a bit awkward for me because I have an appalling memory for names. And so when I'm confronted with 50 different Daves, I forget. But everyone remembers Helen. And that, I think, we can use to our strength as well. Obviously, I don't want to see it like that in the future, and I want us to see, a better gender balance through engineering. But we can use it to our advantage.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, Jenny.
No, I was just going to say, if I saw a differentiation, I can't even say it. I would run a mile, because actually, when I was at school, I actually failed my 11 plus, and I had to go to a secondary modern school, which my father was absolutely appalled at, and we weren't even allowed to do O levels. We did CSEs. And I did get a grade 1 at CSEs, but in my maths. But I used to almost go into palpitation mode, and that's why I think it's really interesting about the diversity of engineering. I think that women, young adults, that they can actually be put off thinking you have to be excellent in maths. But it's exactly what you said. I love engineering and the role I play because I look at lean manufacturing, right? And if I can knock off seconds or minutes within our garment process, it gives me a real high. And it's about everything being lean and efficient. And there's a lot of common sense that needs to be applied to that. But at the same time, you need to be obviously numerical. You need to be able to have those analytical skills to look at data. And we created a system called Galaxius, which is why we've got the leading status in this ethical audit called Fast Forward. We now know who makes what stitch on every single garment. And one of the areas, when we started our factory, I think for 3 years we hemorrhaged money. We absolutely hemorrhaged it. And the idea was that you can only have one quality in a factory, and you have slow, medium and fast machinists, and you paid according to their ability. And in my head, I thought that money incremental increase would actually stimulate each worker to work faster, and actually completely the opposite occurred. And everybody went slower and slower and slower. In the end, we developed a system called Galaxius with a great guy called Mark Randall, and it gave us a touch point and transparency that meant we could do performance-related pay. And with the same workforce, using this system that we had, we increased our production from 4,000 to 7,000 within a 6-month period, 7,000 units, garments. And I think that's what engineering is about. It is problem solving. It is making sure that you're working as a team. And I just think if only we could get that story across at primary, secondary schools to really encourage women to embrace engineering, we would be in a better position.
Definitely. How important are groups, role models? Sarah, you said that groups of women in engineering talking, even if it's a relatively small one like this, or kind of larger scale things, going into schools and really kind of exactly what Jenny was saying and what Helen was saying. Engineering is so much more than maths and physics. There's all the kind of social skills and everything else that can pull together, and you need a mix of people, not just maths, people who are really good at maths and scientists.
And that's very true. And I confess, like Helen, I get very excited by equations too. So I completely know where she's with that. But actually, I think one of the things that I've found working across the period is that when you've got a diverse team, you actually have a really strong team, because you've got that communication, because you've got people who are bringing that in. You've got people who are bringing organisational skills that aren't quite maybe so analytical, but actually really important to make things happen. You've got all of those touch points. And I think when you start to get four together, and particularly of women, because I think we are very often, there are only one or two of us in any room, and that it saddens me, but that is the way it is. I mean, Helen is right, you are more memorable, and that can work to your advantage, but actually that's not what we want, because it's not productive. What's productive is to leverage the whole of society, not half of it or 60% of it, which is, there are so many brilliant people out there, brilliant young people out there who have so much to offer that isn't necessarily down the straightforward angle, but people who game actually have a different perspective. So if you're playing the computer games and video games, they have all kinds of strategic ways of thinking that wouldn't occur to me, because it's not something I do. And it's empowering people to see that. And I think when you are going into schools, and I firmly believe that our STEM efforts at secondary school are too late, we need to be doing this before then, to actually demonstrate with games and with tasks that young people can engage in, that actually, did you know that was engineering? You've had this brilliant time where you've built race cars out of Connects. We said, it didn't work very well. How can we make it better? And we've changed all the systems around, and you've made twice as many. Did you know that was engineering? No. Well, there you go. Wasn't it brilliant? And doing things like that actually is really, really positive. And I was cheering on the side, if you couldn't tell, Helen, when you said you didn't require necessarily maths and physics. I mean, don't get me wrong, love both. But actually what we need is to bring people in and engage them, and then we can equip them. If they've got the right attitude and the interest, you can teach them anything. I really think that.
I couldn't agree with you more there, Sarah. And you're absolutely right, we'd be working with a younger group of students and potential people coming through, because we really need to get that message at a much younger age. I often, when I'm in schools, talk about what did you just even do this morning to get to school? You know, what socks did you choose? What did you do your teeth brushing before or after you had breakfast? What did you choose for breakfast? Because just the act of doing those things means that you've actually solved a problem. You've solved a challenge. You've multitasked. You've worked out the optimal way of doing things. And by that, you've actually demonstrated those attributes that an engineer really needs. And so even just making them think, oh, hang on, yeah, maybe I am, is a really powerful one. And so I think you're absolutely right, and we want to encourage young creative people into thinking about engineering. What we don't want people to do is to shut doors. That's really the worst thing. It's about keeping them open, keeping those options open at all times. I think that's really important. Don't narrow yourself, because peer pressure these days is so immense. That's another real issue I think that we struggle with. But coming back to you, Jenny, of course, actually, you know, what you do on a day-to-day basis with your lean manufacturing and your increasing rates of production and so forth is differentiation. I know, there you go. But it's just about contextualizing. It's just rates of change. That's all it says. But that terminology can be so, and that's why I used it, because it can be so negatively viewed, and it can be an immediate fear for people you know, who struggle in school with perhaps STEM and have sort of, what I often say, sort of got off the bus a bit early and actually not being able to sort of carry on and being supported through that. And then there's a sort of a fear that comes with it. And they don't realise that actually, yes, there's funny terminology, but actually all it's meaning is the rate that you change something. And so it's about contextualizing it, and that's very much what we try and do at NMIT, is we try and contextualize all of that maths, that physics learning, even down to, there's no point in learning simply about ethics. It's application without using it in, for example, your background, Jenny, in terms of garment production, pay and so forth. You need to really think about it in a contextual environment for it to become real. And that's so important. It's about making it real, isn't it?
I think that's why functional skills is so important as well. So we've got a college, and we deliver qualifications from level 1 all the way through to level 5. And what we find is that you are right. I think it was you, Helen, who said we need these creative thinkers within engineering that can think outside the box. And what we find with functional skills is that, you know, you start talking about volumes and areas, bearing in mind functional skills level 1, level 2 is a low entry point. But if you then contextualize it with, you know, numbers of stitches per inch, and this is the area of our sewing area, let's look at the dimensions that we've got. And then if you make it easy, and it is interesting because, you know, I can remember logarithms using the book. Can you remember the book? Oh my gosh, it makes me feel so old to say it, but the logarithm. And I can remember just the books coming out thinking, oh my God, it's logarithms. And I think that fear that you're talking about, you get to the point where you just think, I just can't do maths. And actually you can. It is about teaching and the way that we deliver these subjects. And I think there needs to be a bit of a step change there. And we're on STEM council meeting with Haringey Council, and it's amazing that if you can break down those barriers, we've got a future generation of engineers in front of us, definitely.
Absolutely. A quick point from me is that we often talk about the skills shortage in manufacturing and how there's no new talent coming through, and it always seems the most basic part of that, if you break it down, is why would we alienate 50% of our potential workforce by saying that engineering is only for boys, and you know, you need to be good at maths and everything else. So I think the approach that NMIT is taking, where kind of, and all of you have kind of touched on really, that engineering is for all, and you don't need to be good at maths and science, and you don't need to be a boy to do engineering, is a really important thing, you know, for kind of protecting the long-term skill base that we have in this country. we can't afford to be picky about who enters the industry, I suppose.
I think it's almost wider than that, but I do think that what we have to actually as an industry say is we need to engage with education, because it's great to sit on your hands and say we haven't got people coming through with the right skills. Well, what are we doing about that? How are we engaging with our local colleges, with our local education providers and saying, actually, can we come in? You know, can we perhaps do a module with your college course that just gives them some industrial context? May only be in a very small way, but I think unless we are prepared to engage with with education as employers, we won't get the skills we want. I think, you know, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because you look back at the education you have, and I think I had quite a formal education, and we were taught things, and I know things in a much wider context than curriculum currently allows. Looking back, but also there is far more emphasis now on communication and social skills, which is hugely important, and I think we've really lacked in manufacture. So I think it is about that balance, but I do genuinely think that as employers, if we don't engage with educators, then we're not going to get what we need, because it's not fair. You can't say to an education system, we're not getting the right thing, without telling them what you want and helping them to get there.
You touched on something else earlier, I think, Sarah, along the lines of the diversity of engineering and the huge spectrum of activities, everything from bioengineering right the way through to your fashion engineering. I mean, it's a huge spectrum, and I think we as women need to stand up more and say we are here. This is what we do, and we are engineers, and it's about making our voices heard, so that we may not be the aspirational role models, but we nevertheless indicate that there are people out there these activities, not my career, and I would fully endorse being involved in engineering, and we need to make that, I think, more evident, I suppose, and really bring that out, because we need to imbue in these young people a real desire to be part of this amazing career opportunity, and not to shut the doors and just assume that it's something. And equally, actually, it's not just the young people in the schools, but it's parents as well. Because they have such an important role and guiding their children. So we need to make sure that they're aware as well, really, what it is, and the diversity that we offer. And I think particularly, having experienced now the pandemic and looking forward with issues such as climate change, the opportunities to make a real difference through this career are huge, and that's again what we're looking for at Enmite is to produce the engineers of the future, those who are able to look holistically across all the engineering disciplines, and able to engage and be able to pull teams together, as one of you clearly said earlier, and work with people from a variety of different backgrounds, and those are skills that women are really great at doing, and so to encourage them to be involved, I think is absolutely. We want society in engineering represented in engineering, not just because we think it's a good thing that we should have gender balance, because it makes a difference, because the end result will be so much better, and that's such an important thing.
Absolutely, I think that's a very good point there. What more can manufacturers themselves? I mean, Sara and Jenny, you've all touched on this to some extent. What more could manufacturers be doing, not just to encourage the next generation, but supporting the women that are currently working within them? Is there more that they should be doing, especially the kind of the male dominated senior management? Is there more that they should be doing to encourage people within an organization, which in turn boost the image of manufacturing and women in manufacturing and engineering as a whole?
I certainly think that the big organisations such as British Aerospace and, as I said before, Rolls-Royce, you know, they could be encouraging women more. You know, they could be more open days. I mean, we have open days very regularly. I mean, obviously this is before COVID, where we encourage primary and secondary schools to come in, and we'll go to local sixth form colleges as well. And we just ask them to come in, and we just give them a 2-hour seminar, and we talk about how maths is used in engineering and English as well, and obviously ICT. And we find that that makes a really big difference, because they just don't realise about all the different areas that it cuts across. And I know that we did talk at a recent meeting whereby that factories throughout the UK should have a chosen day where we open the doors and really beat on the drum about how fantastic manufacturing is. I mean, if you think back in the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing was the backbone of the country, and we have so many financial issues, not least the FTSE sort of being knocked off its perch quite recently with the world stock markets. And I just don't think it is appreciated how fantastic engineering, manufacturing is, and moving away from the service-led industry.
I agree with that. I think it would be really good, but I think in terms of the women who are here now, I still think that we have a real issue around flexibility. Coming from a fairly traditional kind of manufacturing, it is very much about, there is a shift system in the factory, and I accept that that's going to be difficult to completely move away from, but there is then therefore certain amounts of support that go on through certain hours, and then, but that doesn't suit everybody. If you've got to get children to school, it's much harder then to get into manufacturing, because you can't necessarily start at the time that they start. If you've got to collect children, if you've got elderly relatives that need taking to hospital appointments, and I think that we have a range of industry that's really good at that, and I certainly see it in some of the service sectors, but for traditional manufacturing, that seems to be a much harder thing to bring, and I think that's where we need to actually share that around. And I think the more women we can get higher up the ladder, the more that's appreciated, because I do think for a lot of the men at the top of quite traditional companies, particularly older generations who haven't had that kind of brush with caring responsibilities. If I think, you know, really even for when my children were young, my husband was quite involved at the time for a father, and now you'd expect far more, but actually for sort of the generation above me, and even some of my generation, they weren't hands-on. They don't understand. They're not the ones who take grandpa to have his hearing test. They're not the ones who take for the inoculations and do all those sorts of things for children. They're not the ones who expected to pack the lunches even. And I think we do need to really think as an industry how we can be agile and flexible, because I think that will make a huge difference.
But do you not think that also knows about technological change? So, for example, and this is where I go back to what Helen said earlier about, you know, thinking outside the box. We have a massive issue in our garment sector, and it is the retailers driving the price to the bottom of the glass, and it happens every single year. We had a situation recently where a dress that we did quite similar 2 years ago is £3 cheaper today than it was 2 years ago. I mean, it's ridiculous. But instead of thinking no, and the world is a sad and gloomy place, what I've thought about is there has to now be technology that regrettably will take the place of some of the traditional skills. And we're looking at vertical integration backwards. So we're looking at doing a collaboration with a company called Cornit. I mean, they're absolutely huge. They've got the most ethical printing machine in the world. And normally printing machines are incredibly difficult. You have different fabrics, different dyes, but they've developed a machine that will actually print on any fabric type using minimal water, literally glasses of water, whereas before it's a very dirty process. And this machine is £500,000. I mean, we are diddly squat to Cornit, who that is listed on the stock exchange, and they're a multi-billion-pound company. But as my husband says, I'm a very good nag. And I went on and on and on saying, we have all these capabilities and there has to be new ways of doing the same job. And we're very close to doing a deal. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be talking about this, and it is being recorded, so it's too late now anyway. But we're very close to doing a deal whereby we can have this £500,000 machine for a 12-month period to test the concept. proof of concept. And credit to ASOS, they have supported us on this as well. So I'm really, I'm getting excited, I'm beginning to jiggle about a bit. I'm so excited that we'll be able to have a service where we can literally print our design, the Ditsy floral, into a pattern piece. And then I'm hoping to do a very similar deal with Gerber, which I'm not there yet, but I'm pushing that over the line hopefully soon. And then they will cut the pattern piece out, and that is minimal waste. That is so good for landfill. And then we'll have the stitchers, who are the ones who've got the skills to pick up the pieces and then put it together again. This is one piece flow as opposed to batch production. And, you know, that's what I think women are good at. Like, you know, this could bring our company down, you know, make no two ways about it. I'm dedicating a huge space to a machine that's got to have 2 gas pipes, extraction pipes fitted, going to cost a fortune. But I also think if I don't do it, then we're not innovators. We're not first to market. We have to prove that there are new ways forward. And that's why I love engineering and manufacturing, because it's never boring, is it?
But to me, that's the difference between a female-led company.
Yes.
Seriously, I mean, you are hugely inspirational. You genuinely are. I can see the excitement, and I'm sharing it. And I know nothing about your industry at all. Absolutely nothing.
He's spinning in his bed at the moment. He's living in his bed. He has lost. He's lost the will to live. It's just like.
But I think that's because you are female-led, and this is where we need that level of agility and that forward thinking and that holistic approach. And you're right, it is a huge leap of faith, but I think in traditional engineering that's been much harder to get moving. You know, I'm quite fortunate. Autocraft is very forward thinking. We're already into electric vehicles, battery packs. We're looking to how we can remanufacture to give them the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th lives. So we're not dependent on conflict minerals and mineral supply as a very small nation, but actually so that we can produce our own, we can recycle, we can reuse. But that's because they're a forward thinking company. And actually we're quite in the minority. And I think where you've got a traditional kind of engineering with a traditional board, that's your sort of level of engagement, enthusiasm and forward thinking is much harder to come by. And I think that's the tragedy for us all, and that's where we need women, to take Helen's point, to be standing up and saying, I am here and I am actually capable.
Yeah, we have a sort of a slight mantra as well at NMIC, where we look for a couple of attributes. We look at the passion, resilience, and you clearly have, you know, demonstrate that absolutely, and they're so important, aren't they? If we can get those, and women are fantastic at demonstrating those attributes, and that's what we need to be real innovators, and that's what we need in the future going forward. We need people who can innovatively think around the issues, because who knows what's going to happen next? You think, my goodness, what's happened to this world in 12 months? We need to be agile. We need to respond quickly, and we need to be clever about how we respond, so that we make a difference, a positive one in the future going forward. And so definitely passion, curiosity and resilience, there's no end to that.
Absolutely. I think we've probably reached the end of the topic. It's been brilliant to see, you know, there's so much passion and enthusiasm on display from all of you, and it's, you know, it's really heartening to see. Thank you to Helen, Sara and Jenny for your time today. Thank you to anyone who's watching it. If you've got any further questions, then please email me, chris.beck@markallengroup.com. I'd be more than happy to pass on any feedback to any of the panelists, or any further questions or anything. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best, everybody. Lovely to meet you.